Hi there, and welcome to another interview. Today, I've got the fantastic Rockin Rosa with me. I'm going to ask her the question I ask every single guest. Hey, Rosa, why did you become mostly carnivore?
Thanks, Stephen, for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you today. Yes, and for me, there's a lot of reasons, but the main issue for me was digestion health. And having all of these just strange symptoms happen to my body, going to the doctor and not having any resolution. And also kind of not being, heard when I discovered that food was the issue, you know, and also there were some mental health issues, but mostly it was for a better digestion.
So, how was that manifesting itself? Was it toilet issues, just pain? What was it?
Well, you know, I would say, and also another issue too, but I think this is all related, was that I had eczema probably since my teenage years. I had a really horrible eczema. And I also had horrible cystic acne. And those two issues, I always thought that they were just genetic and I had to have them for life. And I was just my lot in life. And I had to suffer with those things. And then I would say the digestion issues came later, kind of developing in my 20s. Um, it got to a point though where I was just always bloated. And I was just uncomfortable. And I thought, there has to be a better way. And I slowly started to discover low carb and then keto. And this has been, and that's what I want a lot of people to realize, like, this is not an overnight, journey for me. It's been like probably an 8-year process to find
Wow.
carnivore.
Yeah, I mean that's similar to me. I'm in my ninth year. I started low carb on my 50th birthday, so here I am at 59. So, how you use the description there that you discovered low carb? So, how did you discover it?
Well, I was, everything kind of came to a head for me in my mid 30s. So I was about the age 36. And I will say I was a heavy drinker. I was one of those people that I would drink, after work, into the night. And so that was an issue I also had with my addiction to alcohol and then, sugar, carbs, those kind of things. But what led me to kind of figure out that I had all of these weird things that were happening to me all at once. I was eating, I would say, like, what I thought was a healthy diet. I was trying to make changes. But one of the things I noticed was that I had a lot of yeast. So I had a really horrible yeast overgrowth. I had yeast on my tongue. I had yeast infection, chronic, yeast infections. And if you're a woman, then you really know how uncomfortable those things are. And I always had like really itchy skin all over. And so I had a friend who had candida overgrowth, and she had told me about it, and I had never even heard of candida. And then actually, I was on a work trip in Denver, and I picked up a book called The 21-Day Candida Cleanse. I started reading that book and I realized I had all of these symptoms that they listed in the book. I always had a lot of mucus. I always thought I had, some kind of allergy because I had a runny nose all the time, a lot of congestion, a lot of mucus in my throat, and just all these strange things. And so as I read the book, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to need to cleanse my body of this yeast. And then, in the book, she, and I don't remember the name of the author now, but she just goes through and lists all these foods that you take out, and then all these foods that you're allowed. And as I read the book, I realized I was going to need to give up coffee. I was going to need to give up alcohol, which I was already at the time kind of experimenting with, because I had just this, it was kind of gross. At the time, I had this, like a yellow white film on my tongue, and it was really thick. And I thought, there's something not right. So I quit drinking for a few weeks, and it didn't go away. And so that's when I knew, okay, there's something in my body that is unbalanced, So I went about this process in December of 2014. And, there was so many other issues that I, had that, kind of made sense with the yeast overgrowth. I love sugar. So I was always craving sugar all the time. I had the itchy scalp. I had itchy, skin all the time. I had brain fog. A lot of these things are related. I also had acid reflux and all these things. So I started this process, and it was pretty much a low carb diet. You were allowed the non-starchy vegetables, meat, and then you had to take out all sugar, and that at the time to me was devastating. Because I was trying to eat healthier, so I was eating a lot of smoothies, a lot of fruit, and that's when I took out all the fruit. But I realized I had an issue with sugar because I actually thought I was allergic to sugar because I would eat sugary foods. And what started to happen was that my heart would race really fast, heart racing. And so when I started this cleanse, quickly though, all these issues went away. I took out all the sugar. I was eating, I would say it was low carb. At first, there was some beans in there, but I quickly realized that my body didn't do well with those. I was having a lot of bloating from the beans. And I didn't know that before. I didn't put those things together. I started the anti-candida diet, and I did that for about 15 months, but I felt amazing. I took out the alcohol. I was alcohol free for about 15 months. I took out all the fruit, the sugar, all these things. And it was really hard in the beginning. But that was my beginning entryway to the low carb diet.
Yeah, amazing. So you had these 15 months, you felt amazing. And I'm feeling that is significant that you've said that, because what happened after 15 months?
Yeah. So this was a breaking point for me, because I think at the time I thought because it was originally a 21-day plan. Oh, I'll just do this 21 days and I'll get rid of all this yeast. And then I just go back to my regular diet, right? But I felt so amazing without the alcohol, without the sugar, without all these, because I was eating a lot of breads and pastas and those kind of things. And so without all those things, I did feel so much clearer in my mind, my brain. Oh, it was amazing. I didn't know I could feel that way. And my joints, I did have joint pain too, and that went away. But what happened is I started to reintroduce things, and they were healthy things. They were fruit, granola, and I noticed right away I was craving sugar like crazy. And I would even, and it's even things that I would never eat. I was eating frosting out of the cupboard because I was just craving the sugar. And at the time I was like, why is this happening? I never had a strong addiction to sugar in that way. And then I actually started to drink again, alcohol, because I thought, oh, I can manage this, right? And also I will say that, when I first started the low carb diet, this was not my intention. I was not trying to lose weight. I was really trying to just improve my health, and get rid of all these weird symptoms I was having and things. And so, but I lost 25 pounds in about the span of about 2 months. And that was a really good side effect, but I wasn't trying for it, But what happened it was about in 2016, I was, I'd gone back to adding some things back in, and I was just craving sugar. And all of a sudden I was eating things that I knew were not great for me, processed foods. And I gained about 20 pounds in about 2 months. So it's like the weight I lost, I gained that back, and I wasn't feeling the best either. Some of the mental things came back. I did also struggle with anxiety and depression. Those were things that really came back for me. And then so I would say it took about 9 months, and I decided, okay, I got to make a change again. And I went back on the low carb diet, and I went alcohol free again.
And then, so what was there an influence, or is it just in your own head you realized all this?
Yeah, it was just something I knew that it was working. But also around that time, I was trying to look for, okay, what diet? Because I didn't even know about keto at the time. It was 2016. I started to hear about keto, and I started to look into paleo. I actually did a Whole30. Because at the time I was also a Beachbody coach. And I don't know if you've heard of that. But it's like an online coaching, a lot of workout programs and stuff. And they do have some nutrition coaching in there too, that they have a program. And I was doing that. But I couldn't even really sell the nutrition program because I couldn't adhere to it. I had issues with, they had these portion control, and you eat amount of fruit, carbs, all the normal things that they would recommend, protein. But I started to hear about keto, but I saw there was it seemed like a lot of people were eating a lot of processed keto food. And I felt the best with whole foods. Anytime I had anything with that was packaged, any kind of packaged, or I guess foods like that, I had a horrible reaction. My throat would close up. I would get that racing heart again. So high sugar, high insulin response, I guess, to some of these foods. And so I knew I had to have a whole food diet. So I was trying to find, okay, maybe I can try this keto thing, because I'm already doing low carb. And I felt like I was already doing kind of a keto diet. I just wasn't doing a lot of the fat. I was doing coconut oil. I remember I used to make these little treats with protein powder and coconut oil. And I didn't, now they call them fat bombs, kind of, but they were my own little fat bombs where I could have like a little treat. But yeah, I started to look into keto, but it was different for me because my keto was like a whole food keto. And at the time, nobody was talking about that.
Which is strange. So you were ahead of the curve, but because you were listening to your body. I mean, you just said about the processed foods, the boxed foods. If it came in a box or a bag, you felt bad. I mean, and that's good that you could join the dots up. I also just want to repeat what you said. You were a beach body coach, but you couldn't stick to the nutrition plan. That really resonates with me because when I was high carb and doing my personal training, the nutrition side of it absolutely sucked. It was really bad, and it didn't get results, and it was difficult to stick to. But you'd always blame the person rather than the plan. So you started to listen to your body in about 2016 by the sound of it. So what happened next? What happened once you went whole food?
Well, so I started to get into the keto world, and I was convinced because I felt the best on keto. But the problem I always had is at first I was looking for replacement. So, when my family was having pasta, or pizza or certain foods, I was trying to find a way I could have that food, but in I guess it was really plant-based. Because I ate mostly a lot of plants, when I was doing it. So I was making my own, because this was before there wasn't any cauliflower pizza crust that you could buy at the store. There wasn't all these products there wasn't really all these keto products at the time. And so I made my own cauliflower pizza, and it was a mess. It was hard, because I had to do it all. I had to wring out the liquid from the cauliflower and make my own crust. And I was also doing this all, dairy free. I was also dairy free because the dairy, I had an issue. I noticed that the dairy was causing the mucus for me.
Yes, I mean, that's quite common, isn't it?
Yeah, so, and at the time, actually, I discovered this for myself, and I would actually have, I guess, arguments with people about it because they're like, no, mucus doesn't, or dairy doesn't do that. And I'm like, well, it does it to me, because I would have one piece of cheese and my whole sinuses would produce mucus, get clogged up, and I'm like, okay, this is the dairy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is rife in the whole nutrition industry, where you can be proving something because it actually happens, and someone will say, well, there's no study for that. There's no way that's happened. And you think, well, I did. I've not had cheese for 2 weeks. Now I've had some dairy, and now I'm all bunged up with mucus. What more proof do you want? And you can replicate it. That's the thing. I mean, that's all about science, isn't it? Once you've got a hypothesis, you test it. And I've tested this. I used to be lactose intolerant. Now I'm not, but it's certainly better with raw dairy. Anyway, it's not about me, but you just triggered me there, because that's one of the things. Yeah. It's happening to me. So
well, and I understand now that it's really your immune system. Your immune system's trying to get rid of something, or it's really hyper responding.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, it's dairy that's triggering it. So whatever the mechanism behind the scenes is for you, and for many, many people, I'm surprised actually that you didn't find more people that agreed with you or went, oh, wow, actually, that might be what my problem is. I definitely used to think that dairy was problematic for me, but I think that was in the context of plants and high carb, because I can now have dairy and not have those problems. So anyway.
Yeah, well, I want to say that now I can have dairy once in a while. And I actually started to include it in the past year or so. But I do recognize that for me, dairy is quite addicting.
Yeah, yes. Well, it's nice. Cheese is nice.
Right. It's delicious, right? And I did realize also that goat milk dairy, and I realized this at the time in the beginning of my journey, is I started to have goat milk dairy, and that was I could tolerate that no problem,
Yeah, I think that's because it's the A2 protein, isn't it, rather than the A1. But let's get back to your story then, because I want to get to now and how you became carnivore. So we've got you into the keto world. You're doing the replacements. Just for people that don't really understand that, for instance, a really simple one would be, instead of having rice, you get some cauliflower, you blitz it in a processor, and you make it look like rice. I mean, that's basically
the cauliflower rice.
Yeah, is a classic replacement. So that's why Rosa's saying that it's still plant-based. So
and I was eating a lot of because also I noticed, this took me a little bit to figure it out, is I was having coconut flour, a lot of coconut flour tortillas. But I did notice that a lot of those tortillas also had like potato starch in it or different starches, and my throat would start to close up. And I think this was an allergic reaction to something in the tortilla, but I didn't know that at the time. And so I had to kind of figure these things out. And I was eating a lot of like salads because I started to take out food. Like I eventually started to take out the nuts because I had issues, and all the coconut. I noticed the coconut flour things that I would make, I was baking too. I was baking for my son, and then I would eat some of the muffins, and they were all low carb, and they were all coconut flour, almond flour, these kind of things. And I noticed that I did gain weight from that, from the time that I was eating those things, because they were, and a lot of people don't talk about that, but those are carbs as well. And and they would make my stomach just blow up, like I would get very extremely bloated from those things.
Yes,
So I started to take out food, but I was down to eating just these big, huge salads. And I know Mark Sisson, he calls them big ass salads, right? And I was eating those big salads because I didn't know what else to eat really. And I would add eggs and meat in there, and but I was eating a lot of chicken. I didn't make the connection at the time that I needed to eat beef, but I do remember at one point I had a steak at a restaurant, and I hadn't eaten beef for a couple of years, and I decided, okay, I'm going to have beef. I'm going to have the steak. And I noticed I felt amazing, and my brain was lit up. I felt happy, joyful, like hyperactive. And so I went home and I said, oh my gosh, I told my husband, I said, I feel like $1 million after having a steak,
Yeah. So I think people listening are seeing this journey unfold, because you're taking out nuts, you're taking out beans, you're gaining weight from the carbs, the big salads are not working, and then you've had some beef and your brain lights up. So when did you sit down and think maybe the plants need to go? And I know we just talked about the reasons, but when did that happen?
Well, I want to say it was around 2017. My husband, actually, he helped me with this. He found online this Dr. Gundry was talking about how tomatoes, and I was eating a lot of tomatoes. I love tomatoes, right? How the tomatoes are high in lectins, and actually you should not be eating tomatoes. And then I started to do research, and he was talking about lectins. So he was talking about, beans, tomatoes, all those things, and it made sense. And I said, oh my gosh, maybe this is why I'm not healing. So that was kind of like the light bulb. And I also started to hear about Sally Norton. She was talking about oxalates. And I don't really know the time frame exactly when she started to talk about this, but I was listening to a lot of podcasts because that's where I got my information. Because I was really felt very alone at times in all of my strange, issues with food that, it felt like I was almost allergic to everything, and I was having to remove things. But I realized I had to do that for my own health, because it was not getting any better. Because when I tried to eat certain, I remember I tried to eat a sweet potato, and my whole stomach blew up. I tried juicing. I tried beet juice, carrot juice, and again, it was very uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable I couldn't breathe. The stomach was just so distended. So I realized that the plants were causing the issue. It was pretty immediate with certain foods. But also another thing I want to mention is I didn't know this at the time, but I was eating high oxalates I was eating a lot of spinach, a lot of salad. And my throat had another strange issue. I had a sore throat all the time. And also when I would swallow, it felt like there was little daggers, like needles in my throat. And I still had the rashes, the eczema, and all that. And so Sally, she started talking about oxalates, and I made the connection. I was like, oh my gosh, maybe my throat is from the oxalate. And so I started to just take out the plant. I heard about Kelly Hogan on a podcast. And so this was about 2018, this time. I started to hear about Kelly Hogan, and I thought that was crazy just to eat meat. I heard her on a podcast. I listened to a podcast called Fast Keto, and Vanessa Spina, she was hosting that podcast, and she started to bring actually a lot of carnivores on. And then I was also listening to Jimmy Moore. I listened to all his podcasts too. He really helped me a lot at the time. And he was starting to bring a lot of people that were eating meat, and they were healing. They were healing from autoimmune issues. Michaela Peterson, I started to hear about her, and I started to hear all these carnivores, and I started to follow them. So I started to follow Kelly Hogan and Paul Saladino at the time, and the Strong Sisters, Armstrong Sisters, and Bella. She was one of the first people I really followed religiously with her YouTube channel. And I saw people making it work. And I started to think, oh my gosh, maybe I could try this. But I wasn't sold yet. So because it was really hard on my family, and hard socially. It was hard to go from, it was a little easier when I think people started to shift with the low carb. You can go out to a restaurant and you can get a meal low carb, right? But now to say I'm going to take out the plant and I just want the meat. I only want the meat. Because, I started to realize the vegetables were more like fillers, and they weren't really serving me. But in 2018 is when I developed SIBO really bad. And I was down to just eating a little bit of salad, and I was eating more meat and fat. But I was only eating a little salad, and I was having these horrible, issues. And I got really sick with SIBO, and I started to look into SIBO. And what I found was that it's usually caused, it's a small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. So your small intestine will ferment, certain foods, and, things like fruit and vegetables, really, the fiber. And so I had to take out the fiber, and that's when I decided, okay, I've got to do something, But in 2019 is when I made the big shift after following all these people for a little while. So I started to incorporate, take out all the plants in July of 2019. I started to follow Emily Penton too, and she was a big inspiration for me because she also had like mental health issues. And that was something that I didn't really ever talk about, address with myself. I just managed it. I'm somebody that never wanted to be on medications or anything. So I would just overcompensate. If I was having a bad day, I would just pretend like I was having the best day ever, But I knew it was underlying, mental health issues. And so, yeah, I started to make the change. I started just to eat more, mostly beef. And I was following Paul Saladino, and he was really pushing organ meat. So I started with the liver, with a beef liver. And I would cook it in the beginning. I cooked it, and I really liked it. I was surprised. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really good. So I started with the beef liver. Eventually, I preferred it raw. And then I started just trying like all these different things. And I was loving it. I was loving how I was feeling. And right away, all of my digestive issues went away. And that's the one thing that I thought I could never get rid of. I thought I would just always be bloated. I was always going to have these issues. And then I was surprised with the mental health issues. My racing thought, I was always a worrier. I had a hard time focusing all the time, and I had a foggy brain, and so I noticed right away that all went away. I could focus, I had motivation, and then my stomach was flat for the first time.
This is brilliant. Yeah, it's brilliant. I love it. And there was a lot of name dropping there, which I really like, because one of the things I try to do is talk about other influencers. Even Dr. Gundry there, where you talk about lectins. I just want to add this, Rosa, for people that maybe don't know that I do rehab as well as other things for joint pain. And one of the things, if we can't talk about nutrition that much, the first thing I will ask about is, do you eat a lot of tomatoes, or tomatoes, as you say in the States? And invariably, people with joint pain do. And taking out the tomatoes, let's cool the whole thing off, is one of those things that is a game changer for many, many people. And it is the lectins. I love the fact you talked about Sally Norton and the oxalates, because what you were describing, and the people again that are listening will probably know, as soon as you said it felt like needles or shards, oh, that sounds like oxalates. And if oxalates are something you've never heard of, and you're having those sort of things that Rosa's talking about there, I strongly recommend looking up Sally Norton, because I think she is the definitive expert when it comes to oxalates. And you talked about Emily Pinton as well, who has been on this channel and is amazing, absolutely amazing. And I'll put all the links to these people in the description. So you've got to July 2019, and you resolved your digestive issues, your racing thoughts have gone away, your worries have gone. Was it plain sailing after that? And yes, you had a flat stomach, by the way, you lost weight. Was it plain sailing? Has it been great since then? Or have you had any sort of moments where you found something you can't eat, or, you know, something messed it up?
Well, I did have some issues with, you know, a lot of my issues really in the beginning were just the social issues, even within my own family. My husband, he was just always convinced that I need, you know, you can be on this carnivore diet for a little while, right? A few months, but you're going to need some vegetables. You just need vegetables, right? Because and you know, I think like for people that haven't gone through these, you know, digestive issues that are caused, you know, from a high fiber diet, they don't really understand like the uncomfortable distress and how it affects you. Because I also made a connection, you know, when I would have these flare-ups, I call them, with my digestion, I had to go lay down for the rest of the evening, and the next day I still wasn't feeling right. And I also noticed I was depressed. I got really depressed. And so that's when I started to notice this connection with your gut and your brain, you know, that the food and the response that your gut is having, that affects the brain. And so I just had to stand my ground, though. I had to say, you know what, this is my body, right? And I want to feel great. I don't want to feel sick. I don't want to have these issues. So, but I did have some issues with, you know, I started to learn about histamine. Yeah. Histamines. So I tried some different things because I was still having some histamine reactions. And it took me a little bit to figure out with the eggs. So I took out the egg whites, and I would have the egg yolk. And I started to learn through actually Carnivore Yogi. I started to follow her, and this was around, I think 2020, she was talking about, you know, blood sugar issues on the carnivore diet. And I started to have those when I would eat like a big bolus of meat, you know, a big, so I had to figure it out for myself. And what I've discovered now through trial and error, and actually now the histamine issues have gone away for me, or they've minimized. You know, I do notice sometimes, once in a while, I like to have an avocado. And I did notice with that if I have a certain amount, I will have the histamine reaction again. And also, like in the beginning, I was very sensitive. My histamines were very high, and now it's gone down quite a bit, and I'm not having those issues anymore. So that's what I would say is, like, you know, with the healing of the gut, this is something that takes a long time. It's not something that is like quick fix. Oh, my gut's healed, right? If you have had gut issues for years and years, it's going to take a while. And also gut issues affect not just your gut. You know, it affects like how you process everything, you know, your brain, everything.
Yes. I just want to go back to what you said about your husband there, because he was saying you've got to eat veg and things like that, with well-meaning, by the way. I mean, how has that developed?
Well, I've seen a big change in him throughout the last couple of years, because he actually has seen how the plants affected me. And then he's seen my recovery process and the healing that the meat and adding more meat and fat into my diet has helped me. And so it also has caused him to look at his diet. And also he also will, he'll often share my story with other people. And it's funny now because he'll eat more meat. And he's eating less carbs. He's not, full bore carnivore, but I would say he's more like low carb now and he eats a lot of meat. And he sees how happy I am, when I eat my beef and my salmon, and how my attitude changes. So he sees the positive results. And so now he's just kind of, supportive and sees the good benefits of meat. I don't think people realize that their family will come around when they see a positive result with them.
There's a lot there I just want to just sort of highlight to people in case they missed it, because when I asked Rosa about what issues stalled her journey or put her back a bit, many people might have been thinking she was going to say, well, this hurt, that hurt, I had joint pain. The family issues are real. Social issues are definitely one of the things that I feel when I'm coaching people. It's very rare that the issues are actually, it's not working for the person. In fact, it is working for the person I'm coaching, but their family are so still in the mainstream way of thinking, and they're worried about you. It's not malice. They just can't believe, because they're saturated, no pun intended, they're saturated with the information that you've got to have vegetables, you've got to have fruit to be healthy. And almost it trumps their own eyes and their own experience, so this is not knocking your husband, by the way. I'm just saying this is a very common theme, and I like to get it out into the podcast, is sometimes your family are very well-meaning, but actually they just don't get it. And you can't ram it down people's throats, because it's, I mean, look at your journey, Rosa. I mean, it's years in the making, isn't it? And you even sat on the information for a couple of years, and you were suffering, and there was that answer. So I think, the reason I like doing the podcast is these things come out, and people listening might be thinking, yeah, I did have trouble with my husband, partner, my sister, whatever, giving me lots of grief about this. And I also like that you constantly learn, and I feel this, I'm not ashamed to say it as a coach of many years, I learn every single day something. I hear a new story, something from a client, some podcast, something I've read, and another thing joins up. So like the histamine reaction, quite common, that taking egg whites out can make a big difference. But maybe you're at home and you've never heard that before. You might be 10 months into carnivore and it's not 100% going how you want. There are little tweaks. So it's always good to look at different influences. The carnivore yogi is one I particularly enjoy. She's somewhat individual, so and that's great. It's good to have someone that's not singing from the same hymn sheet as everybody else, and you can take all that away. And again, going back to your real experience, you have an avocado, but now you have it with knowledge and informed consent. So yeah, I'm going to have this avocado. Maybe this is going to mess me up because it's a plant. And that's the other thing. Today I coached someone who wanted to have a couple of beers at the weekend. And my analogy was, well, go into it with informed consent. If you were doing a 400-meter race and you wanted to win the gold medal and your brother's in the stand, you probably wouldn't wave to him. All right. But if you're just doing it for fun, that's your beer. That's your, for the 399 meters, you're not waving, but you have your beer at the weekend. You have a beer. It's going to slow you down. It's not perfect, but it's better than not taking part at all. And I think, being mostly carnivore is definitely better than not being carnivore at all. So
Yeah.
that's really good. So we've got to 2020. You found out about your histamines. Is there any more to your journey? I mean, is there some
Well,
other?
you kind of reminded me of something. The beer was one of the first things that I took out originally in my journey in 2013, because I took a sip of a beer and I noticed my whole belly bloated up. And then also I had a certain kind of beer one night, and I noticed my whole face turned bright red, and it was kind of like a raised rash, you know, just strange. I thought at the time, strange reaction, you know.
Well, yeah.
And then even to oranges, oranges. Oh, I cannot have oranges. And part of the problem for me with the oranges, I have the same kind of reaction where it's like a raised, I can't explain it. It's like my face turns bright red, and it's very hot to touch. And it's some kind of a reaction. But when I was around the age of 12, I was told I had hypoglycemia. And if you're familiar with that, that's a blood sugar issue where you need to eat every 2 hours, is what they told me. And so I would have to go to, I know and I believe that is one of the things that really caused me a lot of issues, is being told that I had this hypoglycemia, because I was getting dizzy spells. But what I learned later is that the hypoglycemia was more of a reactive hypoglycemia, because I was eating all these high sugar, processed foods. And so I was having these issues at the age of 12. And so they would make me go drink some orange juice, leave class, drink the orange juice. And so to this day, I can't have oranges, and that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, and oranges aren't a natural fruit anyway. I mean, 500 years ago, there was no such thing as an orange, and it's just basically humans. I often say man. People don't like that anymore, but it has been man that's been behind sort of hybrid, changing up things. So we had mandarins, and oranges are a thing that's been produced. But in fact, all fruit and veg now, you wouldn't have seen 12,000 years ago. It's all completely different, not much more carbohydrate, much more robust against pests and drought and those sort of things. So humans have deliberately made these plants have more defense chemicals, to be more carbohydrate based, to be more tasty, and these are not things that we should be eating. So oranges, or the reactive hypoglycemia, and your description there is obviously like the inflammatory response, that that extra heat, and
Well, and that is when I think that was around the time when I was just having all these weird reactions, and I realized it was the sugar.
Yeah, it's really that simple, isn't it?
But that's one of the things I resolved with the hypoglycemia that I had my whole life. I thought I just had to have sugar, right? And I resolved that with low carb. And I also will say around 2015, I started to do intermittent fasting. Because even though I was on this low carb diet, I was getting very bloated. And so even the next morning, my stomach would feel full and uncomfortable. But I started to intermittent fast, and it was hard in the beginning. It was very hard for me. But I just kind of lengthened the time that I didn't eat until breakfast. I would go to 10 in the morning to 11 eventually, and then it got better for me. Intermittent fasting really helped too, to reset my gut. It helped a lot. But another thing is that, in 2020, I started to learn all these things, and I really think you need to be your best researcher, your experimenter, your own advocate. You have to really advocate for your own health and how you want to feel. And to realize it's not okay to feel, horrible all the time. You should be feeling amazing,
Yeah.
And so I decided to go back to school. So I went to the Primal Health Coach Institute, And this was in 2020 when the pandemic just started. But I decided I really wanted to help people because I saw the, kind of the pandemic as like a catalyst for people to either go one way or the other, to either improve their health or to basically feed the sickness, And because I saw all these people that were needing help, but they were really gravitating towards the negative, towards the unhealthy foods, the processed foods. And I kind of wanted just to shake people and say, you can stop this. You can stop how your body reacts to this illness, by feeding your body the right kind of food that it needs,
Yeah, I mean, it's so simple. And being your own advocate for your health is really important, I think. And I just want to shout out to common sense here, because one of the things that bothers me is you're told something, and if you're told it enough, you think, well, it must be true, even though it doesn't make any sense. If you're complaining that you've got all these issues with eating all this sugar, and then you're told, well, the best way to do this is to eat very often throughout the day, there's no common sense to that. And that's so obvious to me. But there you go. That is one of the things that we have to fight. These myths and these bits of advice. Like I say, with your husband, it's all well-meaning. Yeah, you need vegetables. It's out there, But when you're doing it yourself and you realize taking out vegetables, taking out fruits has made you feel better. Not eating as often has made you feel better. Got rid of the bloating. It's...
Yeah.
I mean, I've had that in my training. When I did my obesity and diabetes qualification, I was, because I didn't come from the medical profession, I came from athletic performance and advanced personal training. I wanted to add strings to my bow. I didn't have any preconceived ideas about dosing of insulin and stuff like that. But I realized insulin is all dosed in relation to carbohydrate intake. So I just put my hand up and said, well, let's get them off the meds. Let's reduce the carbohydrates. And I also talked about fasting, and it basically made me feel like I've just been beamed in from another planet, because they were absolutely so anti-fasting, even for somebody that is, well overweight with tons of body fat. So allegedly, lots of extra energy. They did not think that someone could survive fasting. And just for the geeks out there, the world record fast is 382 days. And that's, verified in the Guinness Book of Records. So if you've got excess fat, you're not going to starve with fasting. So that's not medical advice, by the way, that's just information. Right. So Rosa, that's been brilliant. If someone was listening to this and sitting on the fence about carnivore, what advice would you give them to maybe get them to try this?
I would say, what do you have to lose? And also, like, how good do you want to feel? Do you want to feel like a superhuman? Do you want to feel younger, more vibrant? And how long do you want to suffer? But also, you don't know how good something's going to work unless you try it. And then another thing is, I really believe that all of our answers are in our ancestors. And that's, why I really believe in the primal, way of living, because, and it's also not, our ancestors were living off the land, living off of meat, they were hunting, and they were doing this for thousands of years. And this is why that we are here right now. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for meat, and
brilliant.
One of the other things I like to do is I like to watch these survivor shows. And if you watch them, they are prizing the fat and the meat. They're not prizing the berries and the plants and all that stuff, because they know that those things are going to make them thrive and live another day.
Wow, that was really interesting. I love that guest. Absolutely amazing. If you like stuff like that, don't forget to look at this video next. And while you're at it, look in the description and download the Carnivore Experience app.